I never imagined that being 5 minutes late could change my life so drastically. But that morning, as I stepped into the glass doors of my office building, clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline, I had no idea that my entire world was about to shift. The city outside was buzzing with the usual chaos. Horns blaring, people rushing, everyone trying to start their day. I had left home a little later than usual. Traffic had been relentless. Construction everywhere. And yes, I was technically late, but in my mind, it was just a small delay, a minor hiccup in an otherwise normal morning. I walked down the corridor toward my office, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floors. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting a sterile glow over the empty hall. I was thinking about my to-do list for the day, mentally preparing for meetings, reports, and the constant juggling act of managing projects. I had always been dedicated, maybe too much, always staying late to make sure every detail was perfect. I prided myself on my work ethic. And then I saw him. David, my boss. He was standing by the glass walls of the executive suite, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a hawk, scanning the hallway like he was a predator on the lookout. I froze for a split second. My heart skipped a beat. He always had this way of making a simple glance feel like a sentence being passed down in court. That morning, his stare felt like a judge delivering a verdict I didn't even know I was being tried for. "You're late," he said, before I even reached my desk. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a statement delivered with subtle disappointment. It was sharp, cutting, almost venomous. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry, David. Traffic was terrible. Save it. He interrupted, his voice icy. "Pack your things. You're fired." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Fired. Me. For being late. For 5 minutes. My hands trembled slightly as I looked around the office. My colleagues were watching, some in disbelief, some trying to pretend they hadn't seen anything. There was a tight knot in my chest, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and shock. I wanted to scream. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was insane. But the words caught in my throat. All I could do was stand there, gripping the strap of my bag, feeling small and exposed. David didn't flinch. He looked at me as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Your things," he said again, repeating it slowly, as if to hammer it into my skull. I nodded numbly and walked to my desk. My hands moved mechanically, packing up my laptop, my notebooks, a few personal items. Every click of my laptop closing sounded deafening in the silence of the office. I felt eyes on me, judgmental, curious, maybe even a little cruel. People whispered behind their hands. Some avoided my gaze. It felt like the whole world had shrunk down to this tiny cube of humiliation that I was trapped in. I paused for a moment, taking in the office that had been my life for the past 3 years. I had poured so much into this place. Countless late nights, endless presentations, brainstorming sessions that went until midnight. I had celebrated every small success, every compliment from David, that looking back, felt like rare drops of water in a desert. And now all of it amounted to nothing. The walk from my desk to the elevator was agonizingly slow. My heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing louder than the last. My mind was racing. How could this happen? Why me? What did I do wrong? As the elevator doors closed, I finally let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief swirling inside me, like a storm I couldn't calm. I pressed the button for the ground floor, wishing I could disappear, wishing the world would just swallow me whole, so I wouldn't have to face anyone. When the doors opened, the lobby was bustling as usual. People were rushing to their meetings, checking their phones, talking on headsets. But I felt detached, like I was moving through a world that didn't exist for me anymore. I walked out onto the street, the cold air hitting my face, like reality slapping me awake. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I just wandered, letting the city swallow me, hoping that maybe somewhere out there, the ground would shift beneath me, and this would all turn out to be a bad dream. By the time I got home, the shock had settled into something heavier, an emotional weight that pressed down on my chest. I sank onto the couch, my bag beside me, and just stared at the ceiling. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. My mind kept replaying the scene in the office. David's face, cold and unyielding. The way he said, "You're fired," like it was nothing. The way my colleagues looked at me, some with pity, some with curiosity, and some, I wasn't sure, maybe even satisfaction. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't a child. I wasn't someone who broke easily. But right now, in this moment, I felt fragile, and that fragility was terrifying. I tried calling a friend, anyone, just to hear a familiar voice. My phone rang a few times before my friend picked up. "Dia, what happened? Are you okay?" I hesitated. How could I explain that I'd been fired for something so trivial? For a mistake that was hardly even a mistake. How could I make sense of someone valuing punctuality over dedication? Someone valuing appearances over substance? I don't know, I whispered finally. I got fired, just like that, for being late. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. Jamia, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. You've always been so hardworking. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I know, but it doesn't matter. He doesn't care. None of them do. We talked for a while, and her words helped calm me slightly. But the anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was the principle of it. It was the humiliation. It was knowing that someone so petty and small-minded had the power to make me feel worthless in a matter of seconds. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about David, thinking about the office, thinking about everything I had sacrificed for a place that didn't appreciate me. And then, slowly, a thought began to form, a dangerous, powerful thought. I had always been good at my work. I had always been capable. I had always been determined. And now, someone like David thought he could end my story with a single word: fired. Well, he was wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to sit here and mope. I wasn't going to beg for my job back. I wasn't going to let David's arrogance dictate the trajectory of my life. I was going to rise. But first, I had to take a step back, breathe, and plan. I couldn't make any rash decisions. Revenge didn't mean yelling or lashing out. It meant proving, with results, with success, that I was worth more than David could ever understand. I went for a walk, trying to clear my head. The city was alive with movement, people heading to work, hustling, building their careers. And I realized something. Out there, beyond the walls of my old office, there were opportunities I had never even considered. New companies, new roles, new paths. Places where talent was recognized, where dedication mattered more than being on time by some arbitrary standard. And if I played this right, I could show David and everyone who ever doubted me exactly what they had lost. By the end of the day, I had made a decision. I would not let this be the end. I would find a way back, not just to survive, but to thrive. Not just to prove him wrong, but to prove to myself what I was capable of. Little did I know, the opportunity would find me sooner than I could imagine. And when it did, David's smug little face would be the first thing I thought of. Because when someone underestimates you, when someone treats you like you're expendable, that's the moment you realize just how far you're willing to go. And that was the moment my journey truly began. The night after I was fired, I couldn't stop thinking about David's face. Cold, unyielding, smug even, as if he had just performed some great service to the universe. By removing me from my job, the humiliation stung far worse than the fear of being unemployed. It was personal. Somehow, this wasn't just about being late. This was about power, about control, about him proving that he could crush someone and walk away without a second thought. I sat on my couch, curled up in my favorite blanket, staring at the wall. My mind replayed the events over and over. The way he said, "Pack your things." The way my colleagues looked at me, some with pity, some with thinly veiled satisfaction. I could hear their whispers in my head. I wondered if any of them thought this was deserved, if they had secretly waited for me to fail, for me to stumble. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Crying felt like admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. Not completely. I reached for my phone and scrolled through old messages from friends, colleagues, even family. Everyone's words blurred together. "You're too talented to let this stop you. This is just a bump in the road. You'll land on your feet, I know it." They were comforting, yes, but also frustrating. Could they understand how deep the sting went? Could they understand that the problem wasn't just losing a job? It was being invalidated, being told that years of hard work meant nothing because I was 5 minutes late. The hours passed, dragging slowly. I went to bed, but sleep eluded me. I stared at the ceiling, letting my mind wander. I remembered the nights I had stayed late at the office, working on reports nobody seemed to notice. I remembered the projects I had led, the clients I had saved from disaster, the praise I had earned. But it all felt meaningless now. David had erased it with a single sentence. By morning, the humiliation had transformed into something more tangible: anger, sharp, focused, and strangely motivating. I wasn't going to sit around and feel sorry for myself. I wasn't going to beg for my old job back, and I certainly wasn't going to let David's arrogance define me. I decided to call my closest friend, Lila. She had always been my anchor, the person who could calm me down when my emotions threatened to drown me. "Daya, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I don't know, I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. I just can't stop thinking about how unfair it was. I feel humiliated. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said firmly, "Dia, listen to me. You are not defined by David, by that office, or by being late one day. You are talented. You are capable. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to hold power over you." Her words cut through the fog of my emotions. I wanted to believe her, and part of me did. But there was still a small nagging voice in my head whispering doubt. Could I really bounce back? Could I really find something better? Could I really rise above someone who had made me feel so small? Lila's voice grew firmer, more insistent. "Dia, don't waste another second feeling sorry for yourself. Use this. Plan your next move. Don't react in anger. React with strategy. You have so much to offer, and this..." She paused, emphasizing the word. "This is just a detour, not the end." I hung up, her words echoing in my mind. Strategy, plan. Don't react in anger. It sounded easy when she said it, but in practice, it was terrifying. Where would I even start? How could I turn something so devastating into something powerful? I spent the day wandering around the city, trying to clear my head. Coffee in hand, I walked past the office building, pretending not to notice it, pretending I wasn't itching to see David's smug face one last time, pretending I wasn't imagining 1,000 ways to confront him, to make him regret ever underestimating me. And then, as I walked past a small cafe, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. An email notification. Normally, I wouldn't check it immediately, but something told me to look. The subject line read, "Exclusive leadership opportunity. Immediate response requested." I stared at it, blinking rapidly. Leadership? Opportunity? My heart skipped a beat. I opened it, and my eyes widened as I read the words. We at Novacorp have been impressed by your professional background and accomplishments. We would like to discuss a potential executive role with our company. This position offers significant responsibility, autonomy, and growth opportunities. If you are interested, please respond immediately to schedule a meeting. I reread it 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Executive role, growth opportunities, responsibility, everything David had denied me, everything he thought I wasn't capable of handling. I sank into the cafe chair, trying to steady my breathing. This could be it. This could be my chance. Not just to rebuild my career, but to soar past him, to prove to the world, and maybe to David, that I was more than capable. But along with the excitement came hesitation. Could I really do this? Could I really step into a role that significant after being fired, humiliated, and doubted? Doubts clawed at me, whispering that maybe I wasn't ready, that maybe I wasn't strong enough, that maybe this was just a coincidence or a trap. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. No, I wouldn't let doubt dictate my life. I had faced humiliation, I had felt anger, and now I had an opportunity to turn all of that into something tangible, something real. I had to at least try. For the first time in a week, a sense of determination settled over me. I pulled out my laptop, drafted a professional response to the recruiter, and hit send. Before my mind could second guess, a week ago, I had been fired. My career seemingly derailed by a petty, vindictive boss. Today, I had a door opening that I never could have imagined. A door that promised autonomy, responsibility, and most importantly, respect. As I walked back through the city streets, my thoughts shifted. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to humiliate David directly. I wanted to rise above. I wanted to prove that my worth couldn't be measured by someone else's small-minded rules. I wanted to succeed on my terms and let the results speak for themselves. That night, I sat at my desk, notebook open, pen in hand, mapping out possibilities. What would I do differently? How could I leverage my skills, experience, and determination to ensure that this next step wasn't just a rebound, but a launch? I made lists, brainstormed strategies, and allowed myself to dream bigger than I had in years. For the first time since that fateful morning, I felt a spark of hope. Not just hope that I could survive, but hope that I could thrive. That I could rise higher than anyone had expected. That I could finally reclaim control over my own destiny. And deep down, I knew that when the time came, David would see exactly what he had underestimated. Not in words, not in confrontation, but in undeniable success. Because this wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about proving my worth, reclaiming my power, and showing the world, and maybe one petty, arrogant boss in particular, that underestimating me had been his biggest mistake. Little did I know, that opportunity at Novacorp would be the first step in a journey that would change everything. And when it did, the person who had laughed at me, dismissed me, and fired me for being too late would be the first to realize that he had underestimated a storm he couldn't control. The email from Novacorp had ignited something inside me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility, hope, determination. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline, a door opening to something bigger than the humiliation and frustration I had endured. As I spent the next few hours researching the company, Novacorp wasn't just another firm. It was an industry powerhouse. A company known for innovation, efficiency, and aggressive growth. Their projects were ambitious, their leadership dynamic, and their reputation unmatched. And the role they were offering me, executive-level operations director, with direct responsibility over some of the company's most critical initiatives. I leaned back in my chair, trying to let the enormity of it sink in. Me, leading major projects in a company like this. Just a week ago, I had been walking out of my old office, my career seemingly in ruins. And now, here I was, staring at a potential opportunity to do something that could redefine my professional life. But excitement was tempered with hesitation. Could I really step into this role? Could I meet the expectations that came with it? Could I do justice to myself? And more importantly, to the work. I reminded myself of what Lila had said. React with strategy, not anger. Prove your worth with results. It was time to channel every ounce of frustration, humiliation, and determination into preparation. I wasn't going to walk into NovaCorp blindly. I wasn't going to repeat the mistakes of the past. This time, I would enter on my own terms, confident, prepared, and unshakable. I started by reviewing NovaCorp's recent projects, their leadership team, and the challenges they had faced. I noted opportunities where my expertise could make a difference. I drafted ideas for operational improvements, project timelines, and strategies for streamlining processes that seemed inefficient. I thought about how I could bring fresh perspectives, innovation, and leadership to the table. As I worked, my mind wandered back to David. I couldn't help it. The thought was almost irresistible. The same man who had dismissed my potential, the man who had made me feel small and inconsequential, would have no idea what was coming. I allowed myself a quiet smile, not out of malice, but out of a sense of quiet vindication. The day of the interview arrived. I dressed in my best professional attire, something that made me feel confident and powerful. A sleek blazer, tailored trousers, hair neatly pulled back, makeup minimal but sharp. I wanted to walk in and radiate competence, authority, and composure. I wanted them to see not just my qualifications, but the person who had endured, grown, and was now ready to lead. The NovaCorp building was impressive. Glass walls, polished marble floors, and a buzz of activity that made it clear this company was thriving. I walked in, heart pounding, and was greeted by a receptionist who directed me to the executive suite. I was led into a large sunlit conference room where 3 people waited, smiling warmly, their demeanor professional but inviting. "Dia, thank you for coming in," said the lead recruiter, a woman named Vanessa. "We've reviewed your background and we're impressed with your accomplishments. Today, we want to get to know you, your vision, and how you would approach leading critical projects for NovaCorp." I nodded, my confidence solidifying with each passing moment. I spoke about my experience, my successes, and the lessons I had learned. But I also framed them in a way that highlighted resilience, adaptability, and forward-thinking strategy. I didn't mention David, the firing, or the humiliation. That wasn't the point. This was about my capability, not my grudges. As the interview progressed, I could feel the energy in the room shift. Questions that initially seemed challenging became opportunities to showcase my problem-solving skills. I shared detailed examples of past projects, emphasizing not just outcomes, but the processes, the team management, and the innovative approaches I had implemented. I could see nods of approval, interest, even admiration from the panel. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the opportunity to present my vision for one of their upcoming projects. I had prepared a comprehensive plan, outlining operational efficiencies, risk management strategies, and methods for accelerating growth. I spoke clearly, confidently, and passionately. For the first time in a long while, I felt a surge of energy, a sense of purpose, and a connection to work that I hadn't felt in weeks. By the end of the interview, the panel seemed genuinely impressed. They asked detailed questions, challenged some of my assumptions, and engaged in thoughtful discussion. It wasn't just about proving myself. It was about collaborating, strategizing, and showing that I could handle pressure with poise and intelligence. As I left the building, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the city. I felt a lightness in my chest, a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. I knew the offer would come. I could feel it. And I also knew that accepting it would be the first step in reclaiming my professional life, my confidence, and my power. That evening, my phone buzzed. An email from Vanessa, the recruiter. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. "Dear, we were extremely impressed with your interview. We would like to offer you the position of Operations Director at Nova Corp. Your start date can be immediate, and we are confident that your skills and leadership will make a significant impact." I read it 3 times, letting the words sink in. Immediate start, leadership, impact. This was it. My chance not just to recover from humiliation, but to rise above it, stronger and more prepared than ever. I allowed myself a moment of quiet celebration. No fanfare, no dramatic gestures, just a smile, a deep breath, and the knowledge that I was ready to step into a new world, ready to embrace the challenges, the responsibilities, and the opportunities that lay ahead. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, a thought lingered, a quiet, almost imperceptible whisper. David had no idea what was coming. The same man who had fired me for being too late would soon realize that I was a force he had underestimated. And when that realization hit, it would be unforgettable. For now, though, I focused on preparation. I studied NovaCorp's internal structure, researched their key clients, and analyzed recent projects to understand where I could make an immediate impact. I outlined strategies, created presentations, and rehearsed scenarios in my mind. I wanted to walk in on day one, not just ready, but unstoppable. Sleep came late that night, but it was peaceful, filled with anticipation and purpose. I was no longer the employee who had been dismissed for trivial reasons. I was Dia, the professional, the strategist, the rising force, and my journey was just beginning. Little did I know, the first challenge of my new role would arrive sooner than I expected. Because in the world of business, success is rarely quiet. And when you step into power, people notice, sometimes the ones you least expect. The first week at NovaCorp was exhilarating, exhausting, and utterly transformative. From the moment I walked through those glass doors, I felt the hum of possibility vibrating through the building. My heart raced not out of fear this time, but anticipation. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. Day one wasn't about proving anything to anyone but myself. I introduced myself to my team, reviewed the ongoing projects, and absorbed as much information as I could. NovaCorp's operations were complex, sprawling across multiple sectors, and I quickly realized that my knowledge and experience would be crucial to driving efficiency and growth. But alongside the excitement, there was a whisper in the back of my mind. David. I hadn't seen him since he had dismissed me, but his presence lingered like a shadow. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to realize that the person he had underestimated was capable of far more than he ever imagined. I began mapping my strategy. I wasn't thinking about petty revenge. No dramatic confrontations. No public humiliation. My revenge would be the kind that left no room for debate. It would be quiet, calculated, and devastatingly effective. It would be measured in results, in influence, in undeniable success. The first step was understanding the lay of the land. I spent hours reviewing NovaCorp's internal operations, studying every department, every workflow, and every bottleneck. I took detailed notes, analyzed patterns, and identified areas where I could implement changes that would produce immediate, tangible results. Next, I considered the broader industry context. NovaCorp wasn't isolated. It competed with multiple firms, including, I realized with a thrill, David's company. My fingers traced lines on the organizational chart, connecting dots between potential opportunities and market weaknesses. With careful planning, I could position myself to influence projects that would directly impact the competition. But strategy wasn't just about analysis. It was about mindset. I had spent the past week in a whirlpool of self-doubt and anger. But now I had to channel every ounce of emotion into focus. Anger was a tool, not a crutch. Humiliation was fuel, not a cage. Every slight David had inflicted, every dismissive glance, every unfair critique, it all became data, a map for how I could rise above. I drafted my own personal blueprint, master my current environment, understand NovaCorp's processes, meet key stakeholders, and establish credibility quickly, identify opportunities to innovate, pinpoint inefficiencies and areas for improvement that would create immediate wins, build influence subtly, gain the respect of my team and leaders without appearing aggressive. Results would speak louder than words. Monitor the competition, keep tabs on David's company, noting vulnerabilities I could exploit professionally, strategic visibility, position myself for projects that mattered most, ensuring my contributions couldn't be ignored. As I wrote this down, I felt a sense of calm clarity I hadn't experienced since before my firing. This wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. Every action would be measured, every decision intentional. I also knew the importance of timing. I couldn't rush, couldn't force recognition. Part of the power lay in waiting, in letting the results speak for themselves. My revenge wouldn't be dramatic. It would be undeniable. David would have no choice but to acknowledge it when the time came. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, a blank notebook open in front of me, coffee cooling in a mug I hadn't touched. I thought about the past 3 years, the late nights, the meticulous planning, the dedication. All of it had prepared me for this moment. Being fired had been a detour, not a defeat, and now I had a chance to channel all of that experience into a comeback that would redefine everything. I began visualizing the steps I would take, project management plans, operational workflows, client strategies, all meticulously drafted in my mind. I imagined presenting a proposal to the board, seeing nods of approval, hearing praise for initiatives that transformed processes. I imagined David hearing about it, seeing his company fall behind, and realizing too late that he had underestimated me. But I reminded myself, this wasn't about personal satisfaction. This was about professional excellence. David's recognition was secondary. My growth, my achievements, and my leadership were the priority. Revenge would naturally follow. To prepare, I also worked on soft skills. I knew that leading people wasn't just about technical knowledge. It was about communication, influence, and empathy. I scheduled one-on-one meetings with team members, learning their strengths, their challenges, and how I could help them succeed. By the end of the week, I had a mental map of every key player in my team, their motivations, and the best ways to inspire them to perform at their highest level. One afternoon, as I sat reviewing financial reports, I noticed a pattern. Certain processes in our competitors' market strategy, yes, David's company, were outdated and inefficient. Opportunities were being missed, contracts delayed, clients unsatisfied. It wasn't malicious. It was just negligence, a lack of oversight. But it was the perfect chance. With the right strategy, I could position NovaCorp to capture the opportunities David's company was letting slip. I felt a thrill that mixed satisfaction with anticipation. I wasn't planning sabotage. I was planning excellence. I wasn't trying to humiliate David directly. I was building a machine of results that would speak for itself. And when the impact became undeniable, he would have no words, no excuses, no defenses. That night, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. I thought about how far I had come in just a week, from despair, humiliation, and loss, to clarity, strategy, and possibility. I realized something profound. My journey wasn't just about a job. It was about understanding my own strength, resilience, and intelligence. It was about proving to myself that no one could dictate my worth. I wrote in my journal, letting my thoughts flow. I am not defined by their judgments. I am not limited by their narrow vision. I am capable, strategic, and resilient. I will rise, and I will do so on my own terms. The past is a lesson. The present is my canvas. The future is mine to shape. The next morning, I arrived at Novacorp with renewed determination. I greeted my team with confidence, reviewed project timelines, and began implementing minor operational improvements. Small changes at first, quick wins to build credibility, but every adjustment was intentional, every move strategic. I wasn't rushing. I was constructing a foundation that would support not just my success, but the inevitable revelation that I was a force to be reckoned with. By the end of the first week, results were already noticeable. Projects were moving more efficiently. Client communications were streamlined, and the team's morale had improved. I began receiving informal recognition from my peers and supervisors, quiet acknowledgements that my contributions were making a tangible difference, and somewhere, in the back of my mind, I imagined David. I imagined him hearing rumors of my success, seeing Novacorp surpassing his company in certain areas, realizing that the person he had dismissed for being too late was now a rising force in the industry. I didn't smile at the thought. Not yet. My plan was only beginning to unfold. There was much to do, much to strategize, and much to execute. But I felt the first surge of what I would later recognize as a sweet, quiet satisfaction. The satisfaction of knowing that underestimating me had been his first and greatest mistake. And with that, my journey truly began. Not a journey of anger, but a journey of strategy, precision, and undeniable, unstoppable success. The morning of my official start at Novacorp felt electric. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the office building, casting sharp reflections on the polished marble floors. The hum of activity was both exhilarating and comforting. A living, breathing organism of people moving with purpose, ambition, and focus. I stepped into the lobby, straightened my blazer, and took a deep breath. Today wasn't just the first day of a job. It was the first day of my comeback. I wasn't the person who had been dismissed a week ago. I was a strategist, a leader, someone determined to reclaim control of my professional destiny. Vanessa, the recruiter who had orchestrated this opportunity, met me at the entrance. "Dia, welcome aboard," she said warmly, her eyes reflecting genuine admiration. "The team is excited to have you. They've been anticipating your arrival." I smiled, shaking off any lingering doubts. "Thank you. I'm ready to get started." My first stop was the operations floor. I introduced myself to my team, a mix of seasoned professionals and younger staff, all of whom were understandably curious about the new executive joining their ranks. Some were cautious, their expressions guarded. Others were openly welcoming. I met their eyes, spoke with confidence, and listened carefully. I didn't want to come across as a boss who barked orders. I wanted to earn respect through competence, insight, and a clear vision. I asked questions about ongoing projects, listened to their pain points, and made notes on areas where improvements could be implemented quickly. By lunchtime, I had already identified 2 processes that were slowing down workflow, one in client communications and another in project approvals. These were minor inefficiencies, but correcting them would provide immediate results and demonstrate the value I could bring. I spent the afternoon drafting detailed proposals, complete with visual workflow diagrams and clear action steps. I emailed them to my supervisors with concise explanations, emphasizing collaboration and efficiency rather than authority. The response was encouraging. Within an hour, I received a note from one of the senior managers. "Dear, these are excellent observations. Please proceed with implementing the changes. We trust your judgment." I allowed myself a quiet smile. Small victories like this were crucial. Not for David, not yet, but for establishing credibility in this new environment. Over the next few days, I began implementing the proposed changes. I scheduled brief team meetings to explain the new processes, encouraged feedback, and ensured everyone understood the benefits. By the end of the week, the improvements were already noticeable. Projects were moving faster, client responses were timelier, and the team seemed more confident and motivated. It wasn't just about efficiency. It was about creating a culture of trust and collaboration. I made it clear that I valued their expertise, that I wanted them to succeed, and that together we could achieve results that mattered. The energy on the operations floor shifted, an intangible but powerful change that I could feel. Meanwhile, word of my accomplishments began circulating quietly. I received congratulatory messages from colleagues in other departments, and even from senior management. Each acknowledgement reinforced my sense of purpose and reminded me why I had accepted this role in the first place. But beneath the surface, a quiet thrill ran through me every time I thought of David, the man who had fired me for being 5 minutes late, the man who had dismissed my dedication, my talent, and my potential. He had no idea that the person he had underestimated was now leading major initiatives in a powerful company, achieving measurable results, and building influence. I didn't let that thrill turn into arrogance. I stayed focused, knowing that the true power of this situation lay in subtlety. Results would speak louder than words, and when the time came, David would see exactly what he had lost. But by then, it would be too late to reverse anything. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a client proposal, my phone buzzed. A notification popped up. LinkedIn update. I clicked it, expecting routine news, and froze. David. He had posted a company update about a recently completed project. The tone was triumphant, but beneath it, I noticed a hint of strain. The project had been delayed, and client satisfaction ratings were lower than expected. A small victory, but enough to fuel my strategy. I smiled quietly. David was still focused on the same minor issues he had always obsessed over. He hadn't evolved, hadn't innovated, hadn't realized that the industry was moving past him. And there I was, stepping into a world of opportunity, ready to turn every inefficiency, every oversight, into a tangible advantage. The days turned into weeks. I continued to implement improvements, taking on increasingly complex projects. My team began to trust my leadership implicitly. They looked to me for guidance, feedback, and insight. I encouraged collaboration, celebrated successes, and addressed challenges directly, but always professionally. The results were undeniable. Novacorp's senior executives started noticing. During one meeting, the CEO himself complimented my work. "Dear, the improvements you've implemented have already made a measurable difference. I appreciate your insight and leadership. Keep it up." The words filled me with quiet satisfaction. I didn't need to gloat, didn't need to boast. The recognition was proof that my strategy was working. I was not only thriving, but setting the stage for the inevitable ripple effect that would reach David, and reach him it would. I could feel it. The whispers of success were beginning to travel, just as I had anticipated. The subtle impact of my projects would not go unnoticed, and the moment David learned how far I had risen would be memorable. But I didn't rush. I understood the power of timing, of patience. Each project, each client interaction, each internal improvement was a calculated step toward a larger objective. I was building momentum, ensuring that when the time came, my influence, my achievements, and my credibility would be undeniable. By the end of the first month, my presence at NovaCorp was no longer just noticed. It was felt. Projects ran smoother, teams were more efficient, and client satisfaction scores were climbing. I had become a trusted leader, a problem solver, a strategist, and somewhere in the background, I imagined David scrolling through industry news, realizing that the person he had fired was now creating tangible results that he could not match. The satisfaction of that thought was subtle but profound, not revenge in its raw, petty form, revenge in the form of undeniable success, the kind that left no room for debate, no room for excuses, no room for arrogance, and with each passing day, with each measurable improvement, I inched closer to the moment when David would understand the magnitude of his mistake. This was not a game of spite. This was not a story of vindictiveness. This was a story of reclamation, strategy, and undeniable proof of capability. And as I sat at my desk, reviewing the latest progress reports, I allowed myself a quiet smile. I had stepped into a new world, a world of possibility, influence, and respect. And while David was still oblivious to the storm building on the horizon, I knew, deep down, that the day would come when he would realize just how completely he had underestimated me. And when that day came, it would be unforgettable. It started subtly at first, an industry newsletter highlighting NovaCorp's latest project success, a client praising the efficiency of a workflow, a mention in a LinkedIn post, nothing explicitly tied to me, but I knew who had made it happen. Every small victory, every measurable improvement, every success story traced back to my strategies, my leadership, my vision. David saw it too. I didn't know it yet, but he had been scrolling through LinkedIn one morning, sipping his coffee with a casual air, when the latest industry update caught his attention. NovaCorp announces accelerated project timelines and improved client satisfaction metrics for Q3. Industry experts commend their efficiency and strategic management approach. He paused, eyes narrowing. Accelerated timelines, improved client satisfaction, strategic management approach. He knew his own company was struggling with delayed projects and dissatisfied clients. Something was off, and he had a gnawing suspicion that the source of this newfound success wasn't some random miracle. It was a person who, until a few weeks ago, he had dismissed. He pulled up the NovaCorp website, scrolling through recent press releases. Every project, every achievement, every headline seemed to reinforce the same message. NovaCorp was thriving, growing, and outperforming expectations. And somewhere within that data, David sensed a familiar signature, a style, a method, an efficiency that reminded him uncomfortably of someone he knew. Meanwhile, I was in my office at NovaCorp, completely immersed in my work. I had spent the morning reviewing a new client proposal, mapping out operational improvements, and drafting a strategy presentation for the upcoming executive meeting. The hum of productivity filled the air, a rhythm I had grown to love. A notification popped up, an email from the CEO's office. "Dear, please prepare a brief for tomorrow's executive meeting. Your recent progress reports are being highlighted, and we'd like your insights on upcoming projects." I allowed myself a quiet smile. Recognition, yes, but more importantly, influence. The power to shape outcomes, to lead initiatives, and to demonstrate undeniable capability. Every small win added momentum, and I could feel the trajectory of my career shifting. Across town, David felt the same shift, but from the opposite perspective. The subtle gnawing in his stomach grew into a full-blown sense of unease. He picked up his phone and scrolled through industry chatter, noting mentions of NovaCorp's efficiency, of a new leader driving measurable results, and of projects that had suddenly begun to succeed where his own were faltering. He didn't know it yet, but the person responsible for this success was someone he had fired, someone he had dismissed for being too late, someone who had taken the setback he had imposed and turned it into a launch pad for undeniable achievement. By midweek, the tension began to escalate. I had completed a comprehensive workflow improvement plan for one of Novacorp's largest clients. It involved streamlining communication between departments, integrating real-time updates, and implementing efficiency metrics that would ensure projects stayed on track. I presented it in a team meeting, explaining the rationale, the expected outcomes, and the benefits for both clients and internal teams. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Team members nodded, asked insightful questions, and began suggesting ways to refine the plan further. The executive supervising the project leaned back, impressed, and said, "Dear, this is excellent. Implement it immediately. I want to see results within the next quarter." I left the meeting with a sense of quiet satisfaction. This was the first major project where my influence was directly measurable. Every decision, every adjustment, every strategic insight was producing results that couldn't be ignored. Unbeknownst to me, David had noticed. That evening, he was in his office, reviewing reports, when one of his colleagues nudged him. "David, have you seen what Novacorp is doing? Their efficiency metrics are skyrocketing. Projects that used to take months are finishing ahead of schedule." David's jaw tightened. "Who's responsible?" he asked, though part of him already knew. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the information with the reality of someone he had fired, now achieving measurable success. A cold knot of frustration formed in his chest. He didn't like being blindsided. He didn't like being outperformed. And he absolutely did not like being reminded, albeit indirectly, that he had underestimated someone who now posed a professional challenge he hadn't anticipated. Back at Novacorp, I was already thinking about the next steps. Success was addictive, but I knew that resting on early wins would be a mistake. I reviewed the upcoming projects, identified potential pitfalls, and drafted a phased implementation plan. I wanted to ensure that every initiative I led was airtight, efficient, and scalable. I wanted results that spoke for themselves. Because results, after all, were more powerful than confrontation. And while I worked, I allowed myself a subtle, quiet thought. David would notice. He would see what he had lost, what he had underestimated, and he would feel the sting of his mistake. I didn't dwell on it, didn't fantasize. It was simply a fact, a natural consequence of the work I was doing, the results I was generating, and the strategy I was executing. A week later, a client meeting went exceptionally well. The client praised the improvements in efficiency, the clarity in communication, and the proactive problem-solving approach. The client mentioned that Novacorp seemed to be outperforming expectations consistently and expressed excitement about the upcoming projects. I left the meeting with a sense of accomplishment, but also with a clear focus. This was only the beginning. Each project, each client interaction, each success built momentum, not just for Novacorp, but for my personal trajectory, and eventually for the subtle revelation that David would experience. And David, he began to piece it together. Small mentions, subtle achievements, whispers in the industry. They were like puzzle pieces, forming a picture he didn't want to see. The person he had fired, the person he had deemed incapable, was not just surviving, she was excelling, outperforming expectations, creating results that directly highlighted the shortcomings of his own leadership. He couldn't confront it directly, not yet, and that was the beauty of it. My strategy wasn't about immediate retaliation. It was about building a foundation so solid, so undeniable, that when he finally realized what had happened, the impact would be profound. I continued to work with quiet intensity. Each day, each project, each decision was a calculated move in a larger game, a game of influence, strategy, and success. I didn't need to boast. I didn't need to confront. I just needed to execute and let the results speak for themselves. By the end of the second month, NovaCorp's performance metrics had improved dramatically. Team morale was at an all-time high, and client satisfaction was consistently exceeding expectations. My influence was unmistakable, my leadership undeniable, and my trajectory unstoppable. And somewhere in a different office, David sat in his chair, staring at reports, reviewing metrics, and feeling the creeping realization that the person he had fired for a minor mistake was now achieving measurable success, and that success could no longer be ignored. The first indirect clash had begun, and the storm was building quietly, inexorably. By the third month at NovaCorp, my presence was no longer just noticeable. It was influential. Projects that had once struggled were now running smoothly. Client satisfaction scores were climbing, and internal workflows had been optimized to a level that made the executives' heads nod in approval. I wasn't just part of the team anymore. I was a catalyst for success, and David was watching. It started innocuously, a passing mention in a market report, an offhand comment from a mutual industry contact, but soon escalated. He began noticing a pattern. NovaCorp was outperforming his company in ways he hadn't anticipated. Projects that should have been routine were hitting benchmarks faster. Clients were more satisfied, and the company's reputation was quietly surpassing his own. He pulled up NovaCorp's client reports one evening. His brow furrowed. Every metric was better than expected. Every process improvement, every operational strategy, every efficiency gain seemed to trace back to a single source. And deep down, he knew the source. He didn't want to admit it, but the realization gnawed at him. The person he had dismissed, the person he had fired for being too late, was now outperforming him professionally in ways he couldn't control. Meanwhile, I was completely focused on my work. I had a critical project on my plate, a multi-departmental initiative that could significantly increase revenue for NovaCorp. I had identified potential pitfalls, drafted contingency plans, and scheduled meetings with every department involved to ensure alignment. Every detail had been considered, every risk mitigated, every opportunity optimized. The day of the executive presentation arrived. I walked into the boardroom, prepared to present a comprehensive strategy that would showcase measurable results, operational efficiencies, and projected growth. The executives were already seated, reviewing preliminary reports. I could feel the weight of their attention, the anticipation in the air, and I smiled quietly. This was the moment where strategy met execution. I began the presentation, walking the board through every element of the plan with precision and clarity. Charts, graphs, projected timelines, and efficiency metrics all illustrated the potential impact. I highlighted areas where previous bottlenecks had been resolved and projected gains in revenue, client satisfaction, and internal performance. By the time I finished, the room was silent for a moment, a pause heavy with attention and contemplation. Then, one executive leaned forward. "Dear, this is exceptional. Your level of detail and foresight is impressive. If executed as planned, this could be transformative for the company." I nodded, keeping my expression professional, but allowing a small flicker of satisfaction to surface. Results spoke louder than words. And this presentation was a culmination of weeks of strategic planning and meticulous execution. Outside the boardroom, I received an email notification. A brief glance revealed an industry article. NovaCorp's operational excellence was now making headlines. The story praised the company's recent achievements and highlighted a rising star who had orchestrated remarkable improvements. David, I could almost picture him reading the same article, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the fact that the person he had dismissed was now being publicly acknowledged for the very skills he had ignored. And he reacted. Within the next few days, I began noticing subtle changes in the industry chatter. Competitors were scrambling. Clients were being wooed with promises of services they weren't receiving. And David's company was starting to show signs of strain. He didn't reach out to me directly. He couldn't. But his influence was evident. Meetings with clients were more tense, emails more defensive, and internal memos reflected a growing frustration. At NovaCorp, my focus remained on excellence. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was building undeniable proof of competence, influence, and results. Each project I led, each initiative I executed, was a step toward creating an environment where success was undeniable and where David's realization of his misjudgment would be unavoidable. One afternoon, I received a call from a major client. Their previous account manager had been struggling to resolve ongoing issues, and they were increasingly frustrated. By now, they had been reassigned to my project oversight. I listened carefully to their concerns, assured them that improvements were underway, and outlined specific steps we would take to resolve outstanding issues. By the end of the week, the client reported a significant turnaround. Workflow had been streamlined, communication improved, and the project was back on track. I received a formal acknowledgement from the client, praising the professionalism, efficiency, and attention to detail that had transformed the project. It wasn't revenge. It was competence, and it was undeniable. Meanwhile, David's frustration continued to mount. He had always prided himself on control, influence, and being ahead of the curve. And now, without any direct confrontation, he was being outperformed by someone he had dismissed as careless, unreliable, and too late. The gnawing realization that he had underestimated me became impossible to ignore. He called a meeting with his senior team, trying to identify the source of NovaCorp's advantage. Every metric, every anecdote, every industry update pointed back to one person, me. And yet, he couldn't reach me, couldn't challenge me, couldn't directly intervene. At NovaCorp, I continued to execute, refine, and optimize. The indirect clash was unfolding perfectly. David was noticing, reacting, and struggling to keep up, while I built credibility, influence, and undeniable results. The culmination came during a high-profile industry conference. I was invited to present NovaCorp's operational strategies, showcasing measurable results and client success stories. Executives from multiple companies attended, including several familiar names from David's network. As I spoke, presenting detailed strategies, case studies, and projected growth plans, I could see nods of approval, expressions of admiration, and a few shocked glances. The presentation wasn't just about NovaCorp's success. It was about leadership, vision, and the tangible proof that I could deliver results where others had faltered. David wasn't in the audience, but reports from mutual contacts indicated he had been following the event closely. The whispers, the updates, the subtle acknowledgement of my success all reached him. The indirect clash had become unmistakable. I left the stage with a sense of quiet satisfaction, not arrogance, not gloating, just clarity. The storm was building, and the impact of my work was undeniable. David would realize, sooner or later, that underestimating me had been his biggest mistake. And when that realization hit, it would be powerful, irreversible, and perfectly timed. For now, though, I focused on the work. Every project, every initiative, every client interaction was a step forward. Success was my strategy, competence my weapon, and results my proof. The first major clash had occurred, quietly but effectively. David had noticed, the industry had noticed, and I had built a foundation so solid, so strategic, that when the final confrontation came, it would be impossible to ignore. By the 4th month at Novacorp, I had settled into a rhythm that was both demanding and exhilarating. Every day brought new challenges, new projects, and new opportunities to prove that competence, strategy, and determination were far more powerful than petty judgments and old grudges. The operations I oversaw were flourishing. Departments that had previously struggled with miscommunication and inefficiency were now performing like a well-oiled machine. My team had begun to anticipate issues before they arose, collaborating seamlessly across functions. Client feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with praise for proactive problem-solving and innovative approaches that made their processes smoother and more reliable. Every success was quietly building momentum, not just for the company, but for me. My influence was undeniable. The executives relied on my insights for critical decisions. Teams sought my guidance for problem-solving and strategy. And though I didn't seek recognition for its own sake, the acknowledgement was gratifying. The results were speaking louder than any words ever could. Meanwhile, David's awareness of my success had escalated from suspicion to concern, and finally, to full-blown realization. He had been tracking Novacorp's progress for weeks, piecing together the puzzle of their sudden operational surge, improved client satisfaction, and market agility, and now he could no longer deny the truth. The person responsible for these transformations was someone he had fired a few short months ago. His frustration was palpable. In a private meeting with his senior management team, he slammed a report onto the table. "Look at this," he demanded, voice tense. "Novacorp is outperforming us in every measurable metric. Every project is ahead of schedule. Client feedback is overwhelmingly positive, and I can't figure out why. Who is driving this?" His COO, trying to maintain calm, hesitated. "David, I think it's that new operations director they hired." "Dyer something," David's jaw tightened. "Dyer!" The name hit him like a punch. The realization that the person he had dismissed, fired, and underestimated was now outperforming him on a professional level was more than frustrating. It was infuriating. And the fact that he had no way to counter it made the sting even sharper. Back at Novacorp, I remained focused on execution. I had been analyzing trends, forecasting risks, and preparing strategies for upcoming high-profile projects. My mind was sharp, methodical, and fully engaged. I didn't need to celebrate. The results were already tangible. Every improvement, every client success, every operational innovation reinforced my credibility. Then came the first big opportunity to solidify my influence further. Novacorp's leadership selected me to lead a multi-departmental initiative that would not only optimize internal workflows, but also expand the company's reach into new markets. The project was complex, high stakes, and highly visible, exactly the type of challenge that could establish my reputation beyond internal operations. I assembled my team, shared the vision, and outlined a detailed action plan. Every department had a role, every milestone was measurable, and every potential risk was addressed with contingency strategies. The team responded with enthusiasm, energized by the clarity of direction and the confidence in my leadership. Weeks passed, and the project advanced with precision. I coordinated across departments, tracked progress meticulously, and resolved issues before they escalated. The executives were impressed, clients were satisfied, and NovaCorp's reputation in the industry grew stronger with each passing milestone. Meanwhile, David's frustration had reached a boiling point. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Every meeting with his team became tense. Every report he reviewed was a reminder that his company was being outperformed, that his judgment had been flawed, and that the person he had fired, someone he had deemed unreliable, was now excelling in ways he could not control. In an unguarded moment, he muttered to himself, "How did I miss this? How did I let her go?" Back at NovaCorp, the culmination of the project arrived. I presented the final results to the executive board. Measurable efficiency improvements, expanded client reach, and quantifiable revenue growth. The presentation was flawless, precise, and professional. The executives were not just impressed, they were awed. "Dear," the CEO said, leaning forward, "this is transformative. Your leadership, your insight, and your execution have completely exceeded our expectations. We couldn't have achieved this without you." I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Recognition wasn't the goal, but it was satisfying to see tangible acknowledgement of months of hard work, strategy, and dedication. And somewhere, miles away, David was feeling the consequences of his own misjudgment. Industry news and client feedback reached him constantly, each update reinforcing the undeniable fact. The person he had fired for being too late was now not only competent, but exceptional. The realization was crushing. It wasn't just professional embarrassment. It was a personal acknowledgement of failure. The underestimation, the dismissal, the arrogance, all of it came full circle. Back at NovaCorp, I continued to build momentum. Each success reinforced my credibility, influence, and professional authority. The team respected me, the executives relied on me, and the industry was beginning to notice. And as David struggled to regain his footing, I remained focused. There was no need for confrontation, no need for dramatic gestures. The results were undeniable, and the impact of my work was clear. The storm had arrived, quietly, strategically, and with unstoppable force. By the end of the month, the project was not just successful, it was transformative. NovaCorp's operations were more efficient than ever, client satisfaction was at an all-time high, and the company's growth trajectory was unmistakable. And in the background, David realized, too late, that his underestimation had been catastrophic. The rise was complete. My strategy had worked. My execution had been flawless, and the person who had fired me for being too late was now faced with undeniable proof of his misjudgment. The indirect clash had reached its peak. David knew I had succeeded, and the stage was set for the inevitable revelation, the moment when results would speak louder than words, and the truth would hit him like a thunderclap. For now, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. This wasn't just revenge, it was mastery. Strategy had triumphed over impulsiveness. Competence had triumphed over arrogance. And results had triumphed over petty judgment. And soon, David would see it all for himself. The day had arrived. Months of strategy, planning, execution, and quiet, unstoppable progress had led to this moment. I had prepared meticulously for NovaCorp's annual Leadership Summit, a high-profile event attended by executives, major clients, and industry leaders. Every presentation, every report, every metric had been polished, rehearsed, and reinforced. I stood backstage, reviewing my notes, taking deep breaths, and letting the anticipation sharpen my focus. This wasn't about ego. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about undeniable proof of competence, influence, and results. And today, the evidence would speak louder than any confrontation ever could. The conference hall was packed. Industry leaders, senior executives, and key clients filled the seats. The air buzzed with energy, ambition, and the expectation of excellence. I could feel the weight of attention, but instead of fear, I felt clarity. Every word, every slide, every statistic had purpose. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, the audience attentive, and the room hushed. I began my presentation, walking through Novacorp's operational transformations, workflow improvements, and client successes. I highlighted measurable outcomes, efficiency gains, and projected growth. Each example was backed with data, visuals, and clear, actionable insights. The executives leaned forward, clients nodded, industry leaders scribbled notes. And somewhere in the audience, though I didn't know it yet, David was watching. He had received a last-minute invitation through a mutual industry contact, an event he hadn't expected to attend, but couldn't resist. Curiosity, professional pride, and a gnawing sense of unease had driven him there. As I continued, the reactions in the room were unmistakable. Questions from executives were insightful, responses from clients enthusiastic, and nods of approval frequent. I spoke with confidence, authority, and precision. My months of planning, implementation, and refinement had culminated in a presentation that left no room for doubt. Novacorp's success was real, measurable, and unstoppable. Then came the final reveal, a comprehensive case study comparing Novacorp's recent project outcomes to industry averages, efficiency metrics, client satisfaction ratings, and operational performance were displayed side by side. The numbers told a story that words could not. Novacorp was outperforming every competitor, including David's company, in multiple key areas. A murmur ran through the audience. Executives exchanged impressed glances. Clients leaned forward, and David froze. His eyes widened as he scanned the metrics. He recognized the workflow designs, the project frameworks, the client engagement strategies. Every element bore the unmistakable mark of someone he knew, someone he had underestimated, dismissed, and fired. It didn't take long for the realization to hit him like a thunderclap. Dia, the woman he had fired for being too late, was now the architect of a corporate success he couldn't ignore. Her strategies, her execution, her leadership, every aspect of Novacorp's thriving performance bore her fingerprint, and the truth was undeniable. I concluded the presentation, stepping back to allow the data and results to speak for themselves. The applause was genuine, enthusiastic, and long. Executives shook my hand. Clients praised the clarity and effectiveness of the initiatives, and industry leaders approached with questions, interest, and admiration. And David, he sat frozen, processing the undeniable truth. The room cleared for the networking session, and I moved through the crowd, receiving congratulations, answering questions, and discussing future strategies. David approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and reluctant respect. "Dear," he began, his voice tight, I didn't realize. You... I smiled politely, maintaining professional composure. "Thank you, David. The results speak for themselves, don't they?" He hesitated, clearly searching for words, and finally admitted, I underestimated you. I never thought. You didn't see my potential at the time," I said calmly, meeting his gaze. "But that was then. This is now. And now, the results are undeniable." David nodded slowly, the weight of his misjudgment settling in. He couldn't argue with the data, couldn't challenge the results, couldn't dispute the outcomes. My success was tangible, measurable, and undeniable. It wasn't about humiliation, revenge, or ego. It was about proof. Proof that competence, strategy, and persistence mattered more than arrogance, misjudgment, or shortcuts. And David, despite himself, had to acknowledge it. As the summit continued, I spoke with clients and executives, expanding my network, solidifying relationships, and continuing to build influence. Every interaction reinforced my credibility, leadership, and professional authority. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, David approached one final time. His expression was a mixture of respect, resignation, and reflection. "You've outdone yourself," he admitted quietly. I didn't expect this. I can see now how wrong I was." I nodded, keeping my tone professional but firm. "It's not about what you expected. It's about execution, strategy, and results. The opportunity to lead, to grow, and to achieve. Some people recognize it, and some people miss it. I just made sure I didn't miss mine," he sighed, a subtle mixture of frustration and admiration in his eyes. "I underestimated you. There's no other way to put it. And it cost me. I see that now." I allowed myself a quiet smile, not of gloating, but of quiet vindication. The months of preparation, strategy, and meticulous execution had culminated in this moment. The results were undeniable. The lessons were clear, and the impact of underestimation, arrogance, and narrow judgment had become painfully obvious to the man who had once dismissed me. As the summit ended, I stepped out into the night air, the city lights glittering like a million opportunities waiting to be seized. I felt a sense of calm, clarity, and quiet triumph. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving someone wrong. This was about mastery, of strategy, of execution, and of my own potential. And somewhere behind me, David would carry the realization of his misjudgment forever. The storm had passed, but the proof, the results, and the victory were permanent. The weeks following the Leadership Summit were transformative, not just for Novacorp, but for me personally. The results of my work were no longer subtle whispers in internal reports or occasional LinkedIn mentions. They were tangible, public, and undeniable. Clients sought out my guidance. Executives relied on my judgment. Industry leaders were curious about the strategies that had driven such measurable success. And David, he had finally accepted the reality he had been avoiding. His initial frustration had softened into reluctant respect, though I knew he would never fully admit how wrong he had been. He no longer tried to compete with me directly. Instead, he observed, calculated, and perhaps secretly, learned from the very success he had once dismissed. I, meanwhile, continued to focus on excellence. Each day, I reviewed projects, coached my team, and sought ways to innovate. The lessons I had learned over the past months, from being fired, to rebuilding, to executing a strategic comeback, had changed me fundamentally. I had grown stronger, smarter, and more confident. I had learned to harness challenges, setbacks, and even humiliation as fuel for growth. The story of being fired for being too late had become a distant memory, a stepping stone rather than a setback. I had transformed what could have been a career-ending event into a launching pad for professional triumph. And as I reflected on the journey, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't in proving David wrong. It was in proving to myself that I was capable, resilient, and unstoppable. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, reviewing the next phase of operations expansion, my assistant knocked gently. "Dear, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "Send him in." The door opened, and David stepped inside. He looked composed, but there was a subtle tension in his posture. a mix of admiration, frustration, and acknowledgement of what he had underestimated. "Dear," he began, voice steady but reflective, "I wanted to come in person, to acknowledge something. I was wrong. I misjudged you, underestimated your abilities, and, well, I couldn't have been more wrong." I studied him calmly, maintaining my professional composure. "David, it's not about judgment. It's about execution, strategy, and results. That's what matters in the end. And the results speak for themselves." He nodded slowly, a small smile breaking through his tension. "That they do, and they're impressive. You've completely transformed the company's operations, client satisfaction, and efficiency." I can't deny that. I allowed myself a quiet, subtle smile, not of gloating, but of satisfaction. This wasn't revenge, it was mastery. The person who had once dismissed me had now acknowledged in his own way the undeniable reality of my success. David hesitated, then continued, I've been thinking a lot about how I approach things, about assumptions I made, judgments I passed, and opportunities I missed. Watching your rise, it's been humbling." I nodded. "Growth comes from learning, David. Sometimes the lessons are hard, but they're invaluable. What matters now is not the past, it's the future, and how we move forward with knowledge, strategy, and integrity." He exhaled, a mixture of relief and acknowledgement. "You're right, I've learned that the hard way. Thank you for showing me, in the most undeniable way possible, what capability looks like." I allowed the silence to settle, absorbing the weight of the moment. This was closure, not vindictive, not dramatic, but definitive. The months of planning, execution, and strategic brilliance had culminated in recognition, respect, and personal empowerment. Later that evening, I walked through the NovaCorp office floor, observing my team collaborating seamlessly, clients on video calls praising our initiatives, and the quiet hum of a company running at peak efficiency. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not just in the success of the projects, but in the journey itself. The setbacks, the anger, the dismissal, they had all been transformed into something far more powerful: growth, strategy, and professional triumph. As I sat at my desk, reflecting on the months that had passed, I realized something profound. True strength doesn't lie in revenge, confrontation, or proving someone wrong. True strength lies in resilience, strategy, and execution, in transforming setbacks into opportunities, obstacles into stepping stones, and doubt into fuel for success. And as for David, he had learned a valuable lesson too. Underestimation carries consequences. Assumptions can blind even the most experienced leaders, and talent cannot be ignored. While he may never admit it publicly, he had been forced to witness, firsthand, the undeniable proof of competence, perseverance, and strategy. The story had come full circle. The person who had been fired for being too late had risen, not just to reclaim professional standing, but to surpass expectations, achieve recognition, and create a legacy of results that no one, including the man who had dismissed her, could dispute. Closed my notebooks, took a deep breath, and allowed myself a quiet smile. The storm had passed, the results were undeniable, and the journey, with all its lessons, triumphs, and reflections, had proven something far greater than revenge. The power of resilience, strategy, and unwavering self-belief. The future was open, bright and full of opportunity, and I was ready. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Peace out.